My name's Kelly. I'm the superintendent here at Sagamore Hill, and I'm here to welcome you for this July 4th event, the 242nd of its kind in the nation. We're going to kick things off with the national anthem. Please rise, and we'll have Calliope Brass play for us. So waiting for a speaker, so I'm hoping he shows up here.
All right behind you, sir.
Thank you. Excellent. All right, we're ready to go. On behalf of Sagamore Hill and the National Park Service, welcome again to a hot and sticky July 4th. As you know, Theodore Roosevelt was a great American who had an enduring love for his country. While living at Sagamore Hill, the Roosevelt family made it a point to celebrate July 4th as a patriotic reminder of the responsibilities of freedom in America. On July 4th, 1886, Theodore Roosevelt gave a speech in what is now Dickinson, North Dakota, which included a passage that is critical to remember today. He said, quote, "Much has been given to us, and so much will surely be expected of us. And we must take heed to use aright the gifts entrusted to our care. So it is peculiarly incumbent upon us here today to act throughout our lives as to leave our children a heritage for which we will receive their blessing and not their curse. We have rights, but we have correlative duties. We only have the right to live on as free men so long as we show ourselves worthy of the privileges we enjoy." These are words of wisdom to reflect on as we celebrate our nation's independence and the freedoms we all enjoy. All right, we have some special guests for you this afternoon, talking on different topics. First, we have Joel Anthony Bosas. He is the first place winner in the 2018 Theodore Roosevelt Association speaking contest for local high school students. Please welcome Joel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Independence Day, 4th of July. The oration I'm about to deliver was given about a month ago at the Christ Church, and it has won me the first place position for the Theodore Roosevelt Public Speaking Contest of Nassau County. So I do hope you enjoy. Do what you can with what you have, with where you are. For in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing. Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was an illustrious man, one of which our great nation is indebted to, not just for his service to this country as a president, but for his extraordinary efforts in a multiplicity of other fields. Roosevelt is to progressivism as Einstein is to relativity. Following the assassination of our 25th president, William McKinley, Theodore Roosevelt was the youngest president in our history. He took to office and within a short or a transient amount of time, built up programs and took several different approaches to both expand and refine domestic and foreign policies. The reforms made by Roosevelt laid the foundation for the seemingly iterative processes that have brought America to new heights, like a skyscraper. In a way, Roosevelt was a metaphorical architect, a builder, or contractor, if you will. A contractor who supplied materials launched our great nation into a series of events that have prompted our growth in more ways than one, thus making the United States one of the strongest buildings one can find in a city, and also proving Roosevelt's vital role in our history for what is a building without a strong foundation. Not only did Roosevelt preside over matters overseas as a mediator to the Russo-Japanese War and by fostering the construction of the Panama Canal, but at home, as commander-in-chief, some of the reforms he implemented revolutionized the domestic policy of his time. Roosevelt induced public-private sector dialogue and regulated big business. His square deals were some of his many accolades within his domestic agenda, but more notably, his trust-busting and curbing of monopolistic power gave way to an increase of rights of the common man and equalized that of large corporations. But the materials supplied by TR, as he's frequently called, were not limited to the confines of what is tangible, but they're evident in the realm of the abstract, his ideology. If there's one quintessential trait about President Roosevelt, it was his profound way of thinking and his disposition on certain matters. While former President Roosevelt may have been a visible interventionist abroad, earning him the Nobel Peace Prize, centralizing his focus at home had significant effects on the nation then and even today. Roosevelt was all the more convinced that national greatness rested on the power to attain a higher degree of social efficiency. So much so that one could arguably say Theodore wasn't arguably just the most socially efficient president. Modern day embodiment and precisely what our celebrated Theodore hoped societal youth would do in their upholding of the mantle of democracy. He once remarked that the government is us. We are the government, you and I. Former President Roosevelt possessed a love of order alongside the capacity to support the interests of the individual to the interests of the community. And by becoming increasingly more proactive in bringing about change, the youth of today is both fulfilling and embodying a Roosevelt-esque social efficiency, doing not just the best thing, but what they can with what they have, with the position that they're in. Roosevelt was an illustrious man, one that we are, in fact, indebted to. The progressives of the early 20th century, for example, were committed to changing and reforming society, among other aspects of American life. And so the most progressive president's progressivism is living on vicariously through the movements of activism today. The legacy of Theodore Roosevelt can be seen in several areas of American history, but not one can solely account for the tremendous prosperity brought about by Roosevelt. The initiatives taken by Theodore were the concrete and stable wiring and laying the foundation of the great building we know to be America today. And so in order to further and corroborate the works established by him, we are obligated to assist in the affairs so justifiably bestowed upon us as citizens. Therefore, we must not be taciturn and reticent, but rather forthcoming with a fervent passion and sense of obligation, a duty to not only our country or our countrymen, or even ourselves, but a prerogative we as Americans reserve on this 4th of July, where we celebrate not just the valiant efforts to attain independence back in 1776, and not just the qualities of this venerable man, but one that we are indebted to preserving as American people, that truly demonstrate just how much of an illustrious man President Roosevelt was, as well as the great nation that we live in today. For as he said 132 years ago on this very day, it is not what we have that will make this country great, it is the way in which we use it. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Calliope Brass with a hot time in the Old Town tonight. And stay tuned for the next special guest. Hold on. So Theodore Roosevelt had many titles in his life, as you well know. He preferred the colonel to his friends. He was also governor, he was also vice president, he was also police commissioner, amongst many others. But I'm sure the president has a few things to say today that are of the utmost import. So with no further delay, Theodore Roosevelt.
Thank you kindly. Thank you kindly. Now, they've actually given me a microphone to say hello to you and welcome you to Sagamore Hill. Happy July 4th. Happy Independence Day today. I want to say thank you to Mr. Bousseau. That, amongst the many eloquent speeches I've heard, that was wonderful today. Let us give thanks to Mr. Bousseau again. Bully. Superintendent Fern was kind in his remarks to mention the fact that I did indeed do some public service to the American people. As your president, previous to my administration as vice president, as a police commissioner in the city of New York, assistant secretary of the Navy, governor of the Empire State, United States Civil Service commissioner, all of it, so much dust in the streets of history. Of all the titles, of all the responsibilities that I ever held, those that gave me the greatest pleasure, the greatest joy, the greatest honor, are those that I share with you. To be a good son and a good brother, a good husband, a good father, a good grandfather, and to the ladies, you really do the most important work of the Republic. You are good sisters, are good daughters. When you become good mothers and good grandmothers, the future of this country looks bright indeed. To the women of the House, hear, hear. I want to dedicate any bit that you might enjoy from my brief remarks today on this July 4th, this Independence Day, when men and women in the United States Armed Forces, here in the United States and throughout the world, are putting themselves in harm's risk. Let us, each and every one of us, dedicate to do our duty as citizen, as they do their duty in uniform. Let us rededicate ourselves to being good citizens, and let us today say thank you to the men and women of the United States Armed Forces and to our veterans. Hear, hear. Sagamore Hill, the construction began during a time when I was cattle ranching out in the Dakota Territory. You can visit the cabin that was once my home along the Little Missouri so many years before this became a home for a large and growing family. Now, I also, of course, lived in residences provided by the public and by the Treasury. I lived, of course, for 2 years in Albany, New York, at the Executive Mansion as your governor. And the first time that my friend from Pennsylvania, our forester, Gifford Pinchot, the first time he came to visit me at the Executive Mansion in Albany, he turned the corner and saw that I was lowering some of my children out of a third-floor window on a rope made of bed sheets, for we were under attack by Indians. Before we began our forest good work that day in my office, I moved the furniture to the side walls, rolled out a wrestling mat, and that tall man and I began to box and wrestle. For the rest of his career, Gifford Pinchot said that he knocked the future president off his pins. But I ask you, who do you think won the wrestling match? Of course, the family took residence at the White House. This was before the East Wing and the West Wing were built. Mrs. Roosevelt said that when the employees of the White House poured up into the family apartment, it reminded her of living above the family store. I don't believe any president ever enjoyed himself in the White House as your president as much as I did. Certainly no family enjoyed themselves more than the Roosevelt family. 6 children, most of them small. The youngest of the Lions cubs, I'm reminded by looking at some of the smaller boys here, my son Quentin was not yet 4 years old. Born on that November date when years before President Lincoln had gone to Gettysburg and reminded us as a people that our great experiment is that we are a government of, by, and for the people. The highest office in this land is not president. It is citizen. and how each and every one does our duty as citizen will tell the future of this republic. Little Quentin and his friends, as they grew, so did their mischief. They and their friends were known as members of the White House Gang, so named by the members of the Washington, D.C. police force that were so often the targets of their shenanigans and their spitballs. One story illustrative, the head White House usher, Ike Hoover, said that the Roosevelt years were no time for a man with a nervous constitution to be working at the White House. There was one day in the middle of winter after a heavy midwinter snow when I left the White House for an appointment. I ascended an open-air carriage. As I did so, one Washington, D.C. police officer gave me a crisp salute. And as the tips of his fingers hit the brim of his helmet, so did a giant 30-pound snowball drop from the White House roof. The snowball smashed through the officer's helmet and left him knocked out cold on the driveway. I did not need to investigate. I turned over my shoulder. I said, "Boys, come down here immediately." Down the little boys came. They apologized profusely. They meant to frighten us for fun, not to harm anyone. And I looked into the issue and I discovered that officer was long overdue for a promotion. But now, ladies and gentlemen, if I may, there's someone who can tell you a story of the White House Gang better than I. He's a young man who today is memorialized not here only at the flagpole, but memorialized by a wonderful display of artifacts down at Ted Jr.'s house, Old Orchard. If we conclude and there's time, I hope that you'll go see that wonderful collection. Bring your family and friends to Sagamore Hill and Old Orchard and give thanks for the National Park Service and the rangers and volunteers who keep this wonderful national treasure in such wonderful condition for all of us to bring our family and friends from throughout the country and throughout the world. But ladies and gentlemen, if I may, it gives me great honor to introduce to you Lieutenant Quentin Roosevelt, the head of the White House Gang.
Hello, everyone. How are you? I wonder if you realize that I grew up here. And I might say it has been a very long time since I've looked out upon the grounds. Of course, I also grew up in the White House. For fun, we would take cookie trays from the kitchens and we would slide down the staircases. And we would roller skate in the long hallways. And his roller skates left the deepest ruts in the floors. It was a wonderful place to grow up. 4 o'clock was children's hour. And father would leave a dusty politician. He would come and play with us boys in the White House attic. He would go about chasing us in the attics. And he would take upon the role of a bear or a mysterious creature. We children were equally having fun, and we were equally terrified, for the bear was made realistic with scratches and growls and pounces. Meanwhile, as we were running around, White House rats were scurrying about at our feet, for that's where they called home. One of these escapades, I had a friend named Earl. He decided to switch off the lights. He thought that would be very funny. Unfortunately for the president turned bear, he was mid-pounce when the lights left the room. Amidst the dark, there was a thud and a cry of, by George, turn on the lights!" When the lights returned, my father was leaning upon a post. He was holding his face, and a small trickle of blood was running down his cheek. Protruding from the post was a 4-inch long nail. It narrowly missed his eye, and it's a good thing it did, for he'd have been all 3 eyes. A family cannot live in the White House forever. My cousin Franklin tried. But we moved out, and we continued my education at Groton and at Harvard. But when the United States entered into World War I too desired to join the fight in Europe. Having a long interest in aviation, I desired to become a fighter pilot. I did not arrive on the front lines until the summer of 1918. When I arrived there, however, I realized that there were several deadly realities that Americans faced. First of all, the Germans were more experienced. They had more airplanes, and they were better. The average life expectancy for the American pilot in the summer of 1918 was between 2 and 3 weeks. Adding other problems for us is that it was very cold. We'd bundle up in these great things called teddies, funnily named after my father, through the teddy bear. And if you desire, you can go to Old Orchard, and you can see one of my old flight caps that once warmed my head. But yet, even with all this warm clothing, one part, whether it be a finger or a toe, we were always somehow cold. on July 10th, 1918, I was able to down a German aircraft, claiming a victory and proving myself as a soldier. Today is July 4th. It's our Independence Day. Well, across the ocean where I was serving, they have the same holiday on July 14th, Bastille Day. On Bastille Day, I was assigned by my commanding officer to organize a day celebration for my squadron and the area French. The party of a ragtime band, similar to the one we have here, we agreed to go to town at noon. At noon, no one knew where I was. I had gone out on patrol and with two other Americans, and it was actually a very calm day. I recall looking upon the green surfaces of the French countryside, and I realized why the Frenchmen were fighting so very hard for it. It reminded me of my home here at Sagamore Hill. I had not loved it so, for then I was separated by a war. The calm was suddenly speared by 7 Germans. They were everywhere. At one point, I had 2 on my tail at the same time. I swerved to the left and to the right. I pulled up and I dove. And I fired my gun when I could. But suddenly my life was over.
It's a very serious thing for a father to know that he's given advice to his son, which has led the son to take action leading to the death of the son. But it was better that Quentin had served and died than if he hadn't served at all. In the months following, the village of Bismarck, Pennsylvania, changed its name to Quentin, Pennsylvania. Following the war, Quentin Roosevelt American Legion Post rose along the banks of the Fox River in Aurora, Illinois. When war in Europe returned, all 3 of Quentin's surviving brothers volunteered and fought with distinction. Ted Jr., being the only general to go to shore on D-Day, leading troops June 6, 1944 at Utah Beach. 3 weeks later, in the fields of France, Ted Jr. died of a heart attack after spending the previous evening in conference and conversation with his son, Major Quentin Roosevelt, namesake of his late brother. After that war, Ted Jr., having been awarded posthumously the Medal of Honor, was buried at Normandy. And in 1955, the remains of his younger brother, Quentin, were brought down from the Marne to be by his side. The 2 boys lying forever side by side with thousands of other Americans. Testimony to the fact that the United States has and continues to be willing to sacrifice its greatest treasure, that others might be free. Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Quentin Roosevelt. A century ago on this date, I spoke in Passaic, New Jersey. It was the last 4th of July oration I would ever make. January 6th of 1919, Epiphany Day on the Christian holiday, I breathed my last here at Sagamore Hill. And 2 days following, after a funeral at Christ Church, Oyster Bay, I was buried at Young's Cemetery. Years later, Mrs. Roosevelt to come be by my side. If there is a legacy to be remembered, let it be this: that I would rather wear out than rust out, spend and be spent, live a life of service for others. Yes, indeed, as Mr. Brousseau has told us, keep your eyes on the stars and your feet on the ground. Believe that you can, and you're halfway there. Do what you can with what you have where you are. My fellow citizens, I hope that you'll go forth this July 4th back to your hometown and continue in the good deeds that you do, like Smiling Bob for education, and like others that I've met today for conservation, for historic preservation, for the arts. Do your good deed. And realize when you do your good deeds, well, this is America. No good deed goes unpunished. Certainly no good deed goes without its second guessing, its Monday morning quarterbacking, its criticism. Persist in your good deeds. The Republic needs them now more than ever. And when you're criticized, take heart from some words that I myself shared with the French over a century ago at the Sorbonne, the University of Paris. I made a speech there called Citizenship in a Republic. And those of you in the sunshine are grateful to know I shall not recite the speech in its entirety. It is a small portion of that speech which remains famous to this day. It delights me to know that these words today are stenciled below decks on the USS Theodore Roosevelt. The Navy calls that great nuclear aircraft carrier, 5,000 Navy and Marine Corps personnel aboard, the big stick. As in the old African proverb I was wont to quote, speak softly and carry a big stick. Continue in your good deeds, and when you're criticized, remember, it is not the critic who counts. Not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man and today to the woman who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who knows the great devotions, the great enthusiasms, who spends herself in a worthy cause, and who in the end, at the best, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, that his name shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. Ladies and gentlemen, let us go forth from Sagamore Hill today, giving thanks for those who've come and served and sacrificed before us, and let us conduct ourselves in such a way to be worthy of the great heritage of calling ourselves Americans. God bless, good luck, and 3 cheers for Sagamore Hill and the National Park Service. Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Hip, hip, hooray! Happy July 4th, everyone! Bully! Bully! Superintendent Furman!
All right, I'm not even going to attempt to follow that one up. It's impossible. So thank you for coming. Thank you for braving the heat to join us here on the 4th of July. Be sure to come back on July 14th. We will have a special event again commemorating in honor of Quentin and his Bastille Day, plane being shot down on Bastille Day. So enjoy, stay cool, and enjoy the band. They're going to play for a while yet.
Hydrate, drink lots of water.